The Chinese government has banned online retailers from selling the Bible. The country has always controlled Bible sales, but there used to be a loophole to permit online sales. Shopping searches on Chinese retailers such as JD.com, Taobao and Amazon, however, are reportedly proving unsuccessful. And news sources are reporting the online loophole has been removed. Most news sources say retailers are not responding to requests for comment. Two unnamed online retailers told CNN, however, customers can still get copies of the Bible from them through private messaging, but public listings of the Bible are now impossible on Taobao. According to the Catholic Herald, the move is another step toward limiting the influence of Christianity in China. Meanwhile, the Chinese government also recently announced it wants to promote Chinese Christianity. According to Christianity Today, China wants to reinterpret and retranslate the Bible to boost Chinese-style Christianity and theology.
Downloading unauthorized versions of the Bible is now an offense in China. Internet users there have noticed that with other Christian books, the Bible is unavailable from online shopping websites such as Amazon China, Taobao and JD.com. According to state media, these companies face penalties for selling publications which they say adversely affect society. The move comes as Beijing is promoting a new report looking at religious life in China. The white paper on China's policies and practices on protecting freedom of religious belief says that the country has 200 million adherents to different faiths. And it promises that China will adopt policies on freedom of religious belief based on national and religious conditions to protect citizens' right to freedom of religious belief. Well, with me here in the studio is Howard Zhang, news editor with the BBC's Chinese service. Howard, good to have you with us. Let's just get back to basics if we can. Those figures, 200 million, which religions and how many of those are Christian?
I believe if you read the official white paper, they're saying 38 million of those are Protestant Christians, and then you have another 38 and another 8 million or so Catholics. So Christians, we're talking about a quarter of that. The rest, Buddhists, Taoists, and as well as Muslims.
And this is in a communist, nominally atheist state?
The atheism only applies to government officials. So in theory, if you're a member of the Communist Party, you're not supposed to believe anything but Karl Marx.
Is it possible that those figures are an underestimate? In other words, there are many more practicing underground, if you like.
Oh, definitely. Because this number is the official people who actually subscribe to the official church or the official temple or mosque. So people who actually register themselves actively as what they call the patriotic official church members. So anybody who's outside that are not registered.
Today's development about online versions of the Bible and downloading the Bible, explain that. What's that about?
So besides downloading, the ban also applies to any sales. For example, Taobao is the equivalent of eBay here. And so any online portal, so individual sales of religious books. So far, Quran is still allowed. At the last minute I checked, but I think most people, those portals have taken down Bible's sales. But you can go to physical stores to buy them, but not directly online anymore.
But why are they doing this? What's the aim of restricting access to the Bible?
Control, because I guess it's a lot more difficult to control what version of the Bible or what type of Bible they're selling. And because many of those Bibles are sold by individual religious either communities or groups or possibly individuals. And the government's aim, I think if you read the white paper closely, it's essentially everything that's sold. Fine, you can practice, but you have to obey my rules. And these are the rules. And these are my versions of events and my texts and nothing else.
Well, with more on this, we're joined from Midland in Texas by Bob Fu of the China Aid Association, which campaigns on religious liberty issues. Bob, thank you for being with us here on Impact. Just on today's story about the Bible, what's your response to that?
Well, James, this is really just a part of the picture showing China under Emperor Xi has come into really a new cultural revolution. I mean, we have not seen such thing like confiscating Bibles even burning the Christian literatures in Xinjiang. And now the Bibles is taken from the bookshelf of the e-commerce stores. And we have seen last Friday a Chinese pastor, a Chinese American pastor, was Zhang Cao, was sentenced to 7 years for purely doing some humanitarian, educational work. And this week, the Chinese Beijing government start attacking even Christian managed kindergarten in Beijing. So this is really just showing the religious freedom in China has entered into the worst period of time that not seen since the end of the Cultural Revolution.
Really? So you think things, despite this white paper which makes extensive use of that phrase religious freedom, you say that things are worse than ever?
Oh, it is, absolutely. Last year alone, according to our own documentation on the ground, over 220,000 Christians alone were targeted for persecution, and over 3,700 were detained.
China's domestic politics are entering a crucial era. I mean, you are now seeing the end of China's reform era. What we thought were Chinese politics from starting in 1978, this period that we think of the reform era, was marked by rapid economic growth, a certain degree of ideological openness to the outside, and relative political stability. China, which was a one-man state under Mao, essentially has now, in the 80s and 90s, became a one-party state, really where collective leadership was the norm. And what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks is that's eroding. You're now seeing China begin to swing back towards a more personalized authoritarian regime that, in my view, is a lot less stable.
And what do you think that means for the future then, inside China?
I worry that those risks of instability that you might start to see as those political norms that had built up in the 80s and 90s begin to erode. Some of the instability that existed in the 1960s and 70s comes back, where leadership decisions begin to reflect the will of an individual, where purges of people who fall on the wrong side of the top leader perhaps become more common. And so I really worry about what this means. I think in the short term, it's a more hardline authoritarian regime. In the longer term, I think it's potentially a more unstable one.
So maybe another cultural revolution?
Not in the short term, but you're starting to think along the lines that I'm worried about, and that has real implications for domestic politics in China.
And I think for our viewers, it would mean real implications for the Christian population there.
Absolutely.
As we've seen crackdowns and so forth.
I think state controls on religion are likely to be ramped up. I think you are entering an era. The 1970s and 80s saw the party back a little bit out of this realm of trying to govern people's personal lives. Religious belief, you had more flexibility to do what you wanted in private as long as you didn't try to organize publicly. And one of the things that's happening right now is Chinese leaders are really starting to take a much tighter look at religions, particularly the ones they regard as foreign. There's this very intense interest in Islam and some really draconian controls that have descended across Western China. And I think it's an open question as to whether some of those controls start to move into and or begin to be used against the Christian community as well. You've seen some suggestion of that in one particular eastern province, and it's probably a good idea to watch out to see whether that starts to spread more widely in China.